Welcome to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
We're plunging into quite a stack of recent sources today. Statements, social media posts, interview snippets, commentary.
Right.
And they're all orbiting around two main things. What exactly America First means, and this really boiling debate about potential U.S. involvement in the Middle East conflict, Iran and Israel specifically.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to guide you through this specific set of materials. We want to unpack the different viewpoints they present, figure out where the friction points are, especially, inside the America First world itself, and look at what these sources suggest about, well, the gap between what's being said, the principles, and what's reportedly being done.
Out of a reality check based on these documents.
Yeah, it's all about giving you a fast track, a shortcut to understanding this particular snapshot of the conversation.
Okay, so let's dive in. The sources, they just jump right into this fight over who even gets to define America First, don't they?
They really do. And right up front, we get Donald Trump's reported take from that Atlantic interview source. According to that piece, he claims he decides.
Because he coined it.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Because in his view, he developed and popularized the term. The source quotes him saying something like, well, considering that I'm the one that developed America First, and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one that decides that.
Right. So he's basically planting a flag. This is my phrase, my definition.
But then, almost immediately, the sources throw in a counterpoint for Marjorie Taylor Greene on social media.
Okay.
And she pushes back pretty hard, actually.
Yeah.
She's quoted saying, everyone's finding out who are real America First, MAGA, and who are fake, and just said it because it was popular.
Implying some people just hopped on the bandwagon.
Exactly. And she specifically suggests this list of fakes is growing and exposing themselves pretty quickly.
Wow. So right there you see this internal definitional fight. It's not just one solid block, even among people using the same language.
No, it's fascinating how the sources really pull that out, that contested idea. And then they show us where that definition is really getting tested right now, which is the potential for U.S. military involvement in the Iran-Israel conflict.
Ah, okay. So this is where the different versions of America First really clash, according to what we're seeing in these sources. We've got commentary reporting on, well, what they see as Trump's position or actions.
Yeah, according to commentary within the sources, there are reports going around that the U.S. is considering formally joining the war.
Formally? Like troops?
Potentially troops, maybe Air Force assets alongside Israel. That's what the reports suggest, according to the commentary.
And this commentary also notes Trump hasn't been super clear publicly, mostly social media.
Right, relying more on posts. But the commentary we reviewed interprets his reported actions as him pretty much going all in on another war in the Middle East.
Which, they point out, seems kind of jarring next to his past promises to end foreign wars, right?
Exactly. And for the perspective of some supporters, the source commentary says this whole thing is being viewed as, well, a big con.
That's strong language.
It definitely raises questions about consistency, doesn't it? Now, the sources do quote Trump. This was while he was heading to the G7, saying, sometimes Iran and Israel just needs to just let them fight it out.
Okay, that sounds more hands-off.
It does. But he did add he hoped for a deal. So a bit mixed, maybe.
Right. Let them fight it out feels very non-interventionist, like you said, on the surface.
Yeah.
But then didn't the same sources have claims about him taking credit for strikes?
They did. They include claims that Trump took credit for initial Israeli strikes, allegedly posting things, and this is a quote from the source material, like, these were our weapons, we're going to make it worse, more of you are going to be dead, let's make a deal.
That sounds very different, much more involved.
And significantly, the sources also include claims reportedly from Israel itself, which they say Trump hasn't publicly pushed back.
What claims?
That the U.S. military is already providing major support. We're talking weapons, logistics. Israel is even reported to have requested a specific U.S. weapon, a bunker buster bomb, for the Fordo nuclear site.
Wow.
Yeah. The sources assert that Israel has stated the U.S. has been involved informally in, quote, all of the strikes, maybe except for assassinating a leader.
So the picture painted in this commentary is, well, it's potentially deep, maybe informal U.S. involvement happening behind the scenes, which contrasts maybe with less clear public messages or even those past statements.
It's a complex picture presented in these source materials.
Definitely. Now, let's shift gears slightly and look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's view as presented in these sources, because it sounds like a stark contrast.
Oh, absolutely. Her position, quoted directly, couldn't be much clearer. She says anyone slobbering for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war is not America First MAGA.
Pretty derelict.
Very. She expresses a really strong opposition to foreign wars in general, saying she's sick and tired of foreign wars, all of them, and that she just wishes for world peace.
And she talks about the human cost, too, right?
Explicitly.
Yeah.
Doesn't want U.S. military personnel killed or injured. She argues instead that the military's focus should be, securing U.S. borders and cities.
Okay, so a very different priority set.
And she lays out her reasoning, pointing to the just massive costs of past interventions. Trillions of dollars, lives lost, the PTSD vets deal with, calling the justifications used in the past propaganda.
So her stance, as the sources show it, is basically no bombing anyone. Israel, Iran, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia. No U.S. money, no U.S. military.
That's what's presented. No financial or military aid involvement in these conflicts.
She uses that analogy, too, about planks and splinters.
Yeah, it's quite vivid.
Yeah.
Saying U.S. domestic problems like the $36 trillion debt, all the other issues are like giant planks in our own eyes, while these foreign issues are just splinters in other eyes.
Focus home first.
Exactly. Yeah. She argues that trying to get peace and prosperity at home isn't anti-Semitic. It isn't isolationism. It's just rational, sane, and love. And that this approach actually leads to trade and economic benefits, which she claims is what many Americans voted for.
Interesting. And she also questions things like the Iran nuclear timeline stuff.
She does. The sources mention her suggesting that asking these kinds of questions is just fair, critical thinking and honest dialogue, especially, she notes, when innocent people are dying.
Okay, so she represents a very, very firm, non-interventionist position, framed as the core of real America First MAGA in these particular sources. What about Steve Bannon and Mike Flynn? How do the sources frame their takes?
Well, their commentary, as it's reported in the sources, seems more critical of the way things are being handled, the execution.
So
They reportedly call it sloppy, ill-thought-through, lacking precision. They even compare it unfavorably to the starts of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which weren't exactly models of clarity.
And wasn't there commentary mentioned about shock and awe being pushed on places like Fox News?
Yes, the source commentary does mention that phrase, shock and awe, referring to that overwhelming force idea from Iraq being pushed in some media commentary.
Okay.
So Bannon and Flynn, according to the sources, express this view that the U.S. is kind of being inexorably drawn into this conflict without clear decisions really being made at the top.
So what's their advice for Trump, according to these sources?
The reported advice is basically get to a podium, speak directly to the American people, and lay out very clear objectives about the U.S. role and goals. Stop relying on, quote, special envoys.
Be direct. Have a plan.
Right. Mike Flynn specifically is reported to suggest Trump should outline overarching strategic objectives for the Middle East, for Eastern Europe, and importantly for the home front, too.
Okay, so they're less about whether to be involved necessarily and more about how the strategy, the communication, they feel the U.S. is just sort of drifting into it.
That seems to be the thrust of their critique as presented in the sources, yeah. A lack of perceived strategy and clear communication.
Got it. Now, let's quickly touch on a couple of other Republican senators mentioned in the materials. Lindsey Graham.
Senator Graham, as quoted in the sources, is a strong advocate for U.S. intervention if diplomacy fails. He reportedly urges going all in.
All in meaning?
To ensure, quote, nothing left standing in Iran regarding their nuclear program.
Wow. And he's specifying how? Like providing bombs?
Yes. The sources say he mentioned providing bombs or even flying missions alongside Israel. He reportedly calls leaving Iran's nuclear program intact a disaster.
Okay, a very interventionist stance there.
Yeah.
Tom Cotton.
Senator Cotton's also mentioned. He's noted for observing that the window to stop Iran's missile capacity was closing, and he points out that strikes reportedly happened after a 60-day deadline for a deal that Trump had apparently suggested.
Kind of noting the timing there.
Right.
And finally, there was another perspective in the sources, one really critical of that all-in approach. Sounded maybe like Rand Paul's kind of thinking.
Yes, the sources include a perspective that argues strongly against intervention. This speaker contends that war isn't a game and really emphasizes the potential death toll, talking about, hundreds of thousands potentially dying.
A much graver tone.
Definitely. They bring up the concept of just war, the ethical conditions for war, and question whether a preemptive strike fits that framework. This speaker suggests attacking Iran could actually backfire
Oh, so.
by boosting nationalism there, making negotiation harder, and ultimately leading to more war and more carnage. And they state very clearly, this war is not the U.S.'s responsibility.
And they also mentioned Trump's past restraint.
Yes, they credit Trump with showing restraint previously and express hope that he resists the pressure to get involved this time around.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together from the sources. It's quite a tangle. You have the person who really popularized America First, Donald Trump, reportedly, maybe, moving towards potential military involvement in a conflict.
Right. And then you have other really prominent figures who also strongly identify with America First, people like MTG, Bannon, Flynn, that last critical speaker we mentioned, who are vocally opposing that kind of involvement.
Based on non-interventionist principles.
Exactly. Principles often associated with that very same America First label.
It's a really, really striking contradiction that these sources highlight, isn't it? The source commentary explicitly calls this tension out.
It does. They contrast the current situation described in the reporting with a statement attributed to Trump back in 2011,
What was that?
where he reportedly called getting into a war with Iran absolutely stupid, and even suggested Obama might do it just for political gain.
So the commentary sees a big shift.
Yeah, and the source commentary doesn't pull punches. They describe this apparent shift, especially from the viewpoint of supporters who really believed he'd end wars as a potential big con. They even label the dynamic a hypocrisy within the movement.
Strong words again.
And they also include commentary suggesting that a lack of clear public statements from Trump on something as huge as potential military involvement could be seen as a sign of, quote, incompetence. Now, we're just relaying what the commentary in the sources says here.
Echo is reporting the sources.
But it shows you the intensity of the critique being leveled, sometimes from within or around that same political sphere.
So this isn't just about, one policy choice. These sources seem to reveal a really deep friction, a real debate within a political movement when it's faced with a complex, fast-moving global crisis.
It absolutely forces us, and you, the listener, to ask, what does America First actually mean when you try to apply it to something as messy and dangerous as a potential war in the Middle East?
Right. Does it mean strict non-intervention? Focus only inward?
Or does it mean asserting American power globally, maybe in ways that actually draw you into conflicts? These sources clearly show that even people using the exact same label can have fundamentally different answers to that question.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of it all?
Well, I think understanding these conflicting interpretations, even within the same political shorthand like America First, is it's crucial for navigating the political landscape right now. You have to see the nuances.
Yeah, you can't just take the label at face value.
Exactly. Looking at sources like these, all laid out together, helps you see that political terms aren't always solid blocks. They can hold multiple, sometimes really contradictory meanings depending on who's speaking and the specific situation they're talking about.
It really underscores why it's so important to look closely at the specifics, doesn't it? The reported actions, the detailed policy ideas, the why behind someone's position.
Rather than just relying on the broad slogans, it helps you understand where political figures or movements really stand on these complex issues.
So if we zoom out for a final thought, these sources reveal this significant ongoing debate over how to actually translate America First principles into real-world foreign policy, especially when it comes to military force.
Yeah, it showcases genuinely conflicting views among prominent figures, and it raises some pretty profound questions about consistency between past promises and what's reportedly happening now.
So here's maybe something to leave you thinking about building on these sources. Given these really different interpretations and all the tension laid bare here, from calls to go all in on one side to these dire warnings of more war and carnage on the other, how do political movements, like the one described in these sources, actually grapple with defining and sticking to their core principles when they're hit with complex, rapidly changing global crises like this?
Yeah, and what does this whole debate tell us about the inherent challenge, maybe the difficulty, of applying these big overarching political slogans to specific, really high-stakes foreign policy choices?
It's definitely a lot to chew on as you encounter news and commentary going forward.
Hopefully this deep dive into these specific sources gives you maybe a clearer lens, or at least more context to view it all through.
We definitely encourage you to keep digging into these ideas, maybe even look up some of the sources yourself. That's all for this deep dive.